Good evening and welcome to what should be an exciting, informative, and dare I say, inspiring event. My name is Howard Ebert and I'm a member of the Religious Studies faculty here at St. Norbert College. Before introducing the presenters this evening, I do want to thank my colleagues in Religious Studies for their support of this event, and also to the Discipline and the Masters of Theological Studies program for funding the event. I, in a very special way, wanted to thank Dinah Grasso, MTS MLS program coordinator. She saw a copy of this and she crossed this off, but I'm going to thank her anyway. Just give me a mic and I'm ready to do whatever. Who has organized, orchestrated, and shepherded this event from the very start. And so, Dinah, to you, thank you very much. It is my privilege and honor to introduce our two speakers for this evening. Each of them have spent their lives in the study of the liturgy and the exploration of how our celebrations of the liturgy can move us to more fully express the mysteries of our Christian faith. Andrew Ciferni, a graduate of St. Norbert College, with distinction, I'm sure, received his doctorate from the University of Notre Dame. He taught at the Catholic University of America, the Washington Theological Union, where he was also academic dean, and teaches regularly for us in the Master of Theological Studies program here at the college and also in Albuquerque. At Dalesford, he has served as rector of the Abbey Church and director of mission advancement. Andrew has served as an advisor to the U.S. Bishops' Committee on Liturgy, as a member of the International Norbertine Liturgy Commission, and as the chair of the International Norbertine Commission on Canonical Life and the Spirit of the Order. Dick Vosko, a priest from the Diocese of Albany, is an award-winning liturgical designer and consultant. He received his MA at the University of Notre Dame and his MFA and PhD from Syracuse University. He is a visiting lecturer at St. Bernard's School of Theology and Ministry in Albany, and he has taught at numerous colleges and institutes throughout the country. He also taught in our Theological Institute a few years ago. He has many publications. In fact, he's recently had a publication in Worship and in America. And he told me to do this, his award-winning book, God's House is Our House, Reimaging the Environment for Worship, received the 2011 Recipient Award, an honor given by the North American Academy of Liturgy for scholarship and practice in liturgical art and architecture. Dick has served as liturgical and design consultant for over 35 different projects, including many of which have won national attention and awards. These include St. James Cathedral in Seattle, Washington, the Cathedral of the Incarnation in Nashville, Tennessee, the Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist in Milwaukee, the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Angels in Los Angeles, California. Both Dick and Andrew have had a profound and lasting impact on this community. In addition to Andrew teaching and being a student here, he has served on the Board of Trustees and served as a consultant in the area of mission and heritage. For these numerous contributions, Andrew was awarded the Hygiene Chair Award in 2002. Dick served the St. Norbert College parish and the college over 3 years, serving as a liturgical consultant for the renovation of Old St. Joe's. And he oversaw the process from visioning, designing, and implementing the work. It is noteworthy that that renovation, completed in 1999, received 2 national awards for excellence in liturgical design. Both Dick and Andrew have spent over 40 years of their lives trying to express and promote the spirit of the Second Vatican Council. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Ciferni and Dick Vosko.
Thank you. I taught a liturgy course here in the J term, and a lot of the students are, in fact, virtually every one of them is here, even though the grades are in. And I want to say that the guiding concept of what I'm going to do comes from something they heard in class. And that is from the idea that the materiality of worship, the shape of the space, gesture, posture, the objects we use, everything that we see, touch, smell, hear, that is what we call the surface structure of rites, and that those surface structures are expressing and shaping much deeper psychological, emotional, theological, spiritual realities and processes. So that's the idea that underlies this. It's really great to be doing this on the patronal feast of the church we're going to be looking at, the feast of St. Joseph, on the 13th anniversary of its rededication. So my premise is that the renovation of Old St. Joe's expresses and continues to shape the basic theological principles of Sacrosanctum Concilium, the first of the 4 dogmatic constitutions of the Second Vatican Council. So the first thing I think that it does is comes from it is stated very clearly in the introduction to the rite for the Christian initiation of adults, which is one of the items that is listed by the bishops in the back half of the Constitution. In other words, the first 46 numbers are the theological principles, and then they're spelled out. And one of them is that the rite for the Christian initiation of adults be restored as the normative practice. In other words, that all baptismal practice is seen in terms of the norms that are set up by adult initiation. And in that introduction, it says that the life of faith is an adult journey. We never fully arrive. And that every point of arrival, what the Constitution would call a summit, is at the same moment a source, a beginning. So I see in this long processional space that comes from the street to this portal, the beginning of this sense of movement and journey that really never ends until we die. So we never have, the faith just all tied up neatly, solid and finished at any one point in our life. On that journey of faith, we pass through portals. And the one portal is a critical design element, because for each and every one of us, there is one true way of entry. Jesus is the door. Christ is the door through which we enter. We become this one body of Christ in the womb of baptism, in which we receive a common call to holiness. Now, what you should be noticing already is that we're setting up here contrasts to what was there before and what is there now. So, for example, we say that in the rites, the prayer texts and the verbs, the symbols, because the symbols are basically verbs, that they're interpreting one another. So that in this blessing of water, especially as we hear it in the Easter Vigil, in which the images of water are of both source of life and possibility of death or destruction. So that the first thing we hear is that the waters are a chaos at the beginning over which the Spirit hovers, and out of that comes a creation. First of all, to notice is that wherever the Spirit is involved, we move towards materiality, all right? So the Word comes to Mary, and the Word becomes flesh, right? So that Spirit that inspires the artist, the architect. But it's a chaos. And then there is this water of the Reed Sea, which for some is life and for others is death, or Jesus in the Jordan. So the water images are large images, and the word baptism is a transliteration of the Greek word for dunking. So if we look at that old image, if we could go back to that one stick, the one on the left there, probably there is an incongruence between the prayer and the gesture, because you couldn't drown much in that except a gerbil. And so what is happening in here is now we see a font that really, even in its top shape, is giving us this sense of that it is a womb which gives birth to new Christians. So we, are we at 4? All right, thank you. We become this one body of Christ in the womb of baptism, in which we receive a common call to holiness. Now, this is kind of prefigured in the Constitution of the Sacred Liturgy, but it comes to full bloom in Lumen Gentium, the dogmatic constitution on the church. So that we begin with the people of God. We do not begin with the original outline of that document, which began, with the bishops and the ordained ministry. We begin with we are all one people of God through the sacrament of baptism. It is perhaps the most grounding retrieval of our Catholic tradition in this renewed understanding of a common baptismal call that opens up to the other sacraments which then differentiate us. So we see this sense, especially in these photos on the right and the potential in the photo on the left, of what we hear in the Easter Vigil every year, that when we went down into the water, we went down into the death of Christ and rose up with him. So there, in other words, you have to have some sense that it is possible to drown in this way of life. Now, because I served in the Byzantine Church for 10 years and always did baptisms like this, if you ever are at a place like that, what you need to do is watch the mothers as you're doing this. And you have a real sense of the danger of the rite, and therefore the potential danger of becoming a Christian. So we learn then what we always knew, that there's a real presence of Christ in many ways, many ways. Yes, in the substantial presence of the consecrated elements of bread and wine, but in this first presence of which the Council speaks, when it says there is a presence in our very gathering. In the gathering, the body is remembered. And that is a much more critical issue for us in a church that for many, many of us was urban, where we lived in very Catholic neighborhoods and knew what was going on day to day, to a church in which we are often driving to church and reconnecting, perhaps, again, after many days, perhaps after a week or more, so that this gathering space and lingering space becomes perhaps the first place where we are sensing this presence of Christ. It is one of the 4 presences that is recognized in the Constitution. From a place where the only place that we use that language of presence was in the ongoing presence of Christ in the consecrated elements. So we remember each time we gather at the Eucharist, and the space provides that. The space both expresses and shapes this sense of how we experience Christ in our gathering. So we are rooted in one baptism, one call to holiness, and we are differentiated into a hierarchically ordered assembly where there is less, as we see here, a front and a back, to a space where we are looking more at a center, Christ in the midst, one another experienced across and through the central activities of the rites. The rites demand spaces for the proclamation of the word and for the table ministry. So this sense in which spaces are created by the acts, by the different acts, the different ritual elements of the Eucharist. In this space, Old St. Joe's, we are blessed to experience the best of our past. In other words, the unveiling of what is really there before the other elements were added. We were speaking in dinner this evening, I call it the urban legend about the building of Old St. Joe's. I've heard this from when I came here in 1961, that the builder of the church was a shipbuilder who simply built a ship upside down, all right? And how that is revealed. In other words, we come to the original genius of the space, which reflects one of the principles at work throughout the council. There were two elements which we are still holding in a certain tension. And that is that the one was the theological impulse that was leading up to the council and flowered there, that in the technical language of theology we call ressourcement. So going back and really exploring the tradition and retrieving what is best in that. It was an interesting experience because the theologians who were most responsible for that, virtually every one of them had been silenced in the decades before the council, and then bishops brought them as their advisors. And so they had a deep influence on the shaping of the documents. But then we have the Italian word aggiornamento. So how does that tradition that is being retrieved, brought into the present and moving into the future? And so there's a tension there that has been present all along and that is still with us. So finally, we have a space so there it is. You know, for those of you who have never seen that picture, this was what Abbot Pennings found when the bishop gave the Norbertines this church in 1898. So it had been built by a French priest before the Norbertines even came to the United States. It was declared the National Shrine of St. Joseph, and it is very reflective of its time, but you know that the arches are not real arches. You know that this is covering something. So we have then a first renovation that you've seen. Can we go back one day? So that happens immediately after the council. So there's a sense in the council that we focus on the most focal objects, the ambo, the altar, the sense of movement, but there's also, a certain iconoclasm that happens with that, all right? And in fact, it's changing, we might say, the interior decorating, but it's still working, back front. And then we have this very bold step that's taken in what you see today. Next. A church which reveals its original genius, but where the space is serving the body, not where the body is restricted and confined by the space. So if you were old enough to know that, you'd have to be rather old to know the first picture you've seen, and you'd have to be at least middle-aged to know the second incarnation, and then you have the present, where you know that there is this ability to shape this for the rites. So it's very much carrying the tradition in a way perhaps that it has never done before, and yet responds to a deeper vision of church. Finally, and this is the question that we would ultimately have to ask about the space, is, does this space empower us to go forth to proclaim the gospel by our lives? In other words, any questions about, is this good worship, would eventually need to move us to a consideration of what is happening after. Because we have known Christ's presence in worship, we leave with a clearer vision of his presence everywhere. Our mutual reverence in worship leads to a deeper reverence for the service of God's children and for the life of the world.
When we were invited to put this program together, we were challenged to think about the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy, the past, the present, and the future. And the way we've organized the evening is for Andrew and for me to make these brief presentations about the past and now about what's going on today. And then together we've raised some questions toward the end of my little presentation here, and then we're going to turn it over to you. So that's the past, and what a wonderful foundation has been given to us. Well, what is going on today? A good thing to remember is that this Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy went through a series of votes, and it was not an easy thing for the bishops who were gathered at the council to come to this decision, and it was their third vote, a very historical one that took place. And can anyone guess what the final vote was?
Tell them how many bishops were there.
Well, a little over 2,147. That's a clue. Close. 2,147 bishops voted yes, 4 voted no. Well, one might say there's a little bit of consensus then that things needed to be changed a little bit. And the bishops themselves got an education while they were there. A lot has happened, though, since that time, over the past 50 years. And I'd like to make this presentation beginning with a context. An article appeared in the London Times not long ago, and here are some sections from a particular paragraph. Allow me to read along with you. The arts appropriate and disseminate some of the only spiritual values left in an increasingly secular world. The new aesthetic creed is converting hordes of heathens by the day. It's apparent in our art galleries modeled on religious precedents. They may not find God in these galleries, but they will certainly get something sacred, and in the hope that they will emerge enlightened. James Fox was reporting on 3 blockbuster exhibits going on in London at the time. The Da Vinci exhibit, which will not go throughout the world, at the National Gallery, the Lucian Freud at the National Portrait Gallery. The Lucian Freud exhibit will play in Fort Worth at the Kimball, I think, and the David Hockney exhibit at the Royal Academy. So what's going on with these art exhibits that just attract so many people? Last summer, the Alexander McQueen exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City was there for days, and every day people, long lines of people all around the museum waited for hours to get in to see this fashion designer's work. And in Philadelphia, it's an exhibit I just saw last week, the Van Gogh exhibit that also will not travel throughout the United States. People waiting in line to get in here. It's a fascinating kind of thing that's going on today here in the United States, at the same time that in many of our churches around the country, the congregations are dwindling. The picture in the upper left is a church in my diocese in Albany, New York. It has since been closed on a Sunday. It's a Presbyterian church in the lower left, right-hand corner. So it's not news to us that there is a tremendous shift in religious behavior in the United States of America. On one hand, people seem to be searching for what they're finding in these secular venues. At the same time, they're not going to church, except in many evangelical Protestant churches that we're looking at here now. Joel Osteen is quite a hero in this one-time basketball arena in the upper left and this other megachurch in the lower right hand. Now, it's not to say that the evangelical Protestants don't have their problems. They do. But they're attracting people. And what is it that's attracting? It's their sense of hospitality. It's their charismatic preaching. It's their praise bands. It's their weeknight engagements for people with all kinds of needs and expectations. They simply reach out to take you where you're at, first of all. They also rely heavily on technology, projected images, the latest in acoustical equipment, the latest in terms of musical instrumentation, and so forth. So the greatest study that one can draw from, and there are many of them, but for me it would be the Pew Research Foundation. Here are just some conclusions from their study in 2008. Religious affiliation in the United States is diverse and fluid. 28% have left the religion they were raised in. 44% have switched religions, joined religions, or dropped religion altogether. 16% practice no faith. The largest increase of professed atheists since 1990 is found in professed atheists. That number doubled from 1990 to the 2000 census. We look at the Lewis Center for Church Leadership, and the Catholic Church isn't mentioned here, but just take a look at this particular graph. So the Catholic Church is not the only mainline religion that is experiencing these tremendous shifts in religious behavior and membership. Look at the attendance downturn, especially for Episcopalians and all these other mainline religions. At the very same time, there's another phenomenon going on that you've probably read about, and it's called the emerging church. The same thing is going on in Jewish traditions, regardless of the denomination, especially in the conservative and the reform. The emerging rabbis and cantors, they are charismatic leaders, are doing something very unusual that's non-traditional. And in these emerging churches, they've latched onto something called ancient new. And so they'll convert an unused church building, formerly used by a mainline religion, convert it into a large living room, and they will create worship experiences that are leaderless, at the same time that they draw on ancient religions, using incense and candles, bread and wine, scripture readings or other religious readings, trying to connect in some way with that which eludes them, that which is, one might say, transcendent. In her brand new book, just released last month, Christianity After Religion, Diane Butler Bass writes in her blog, Americans are searching for churches that are not caught up in political intrigue, rigid rules and prohibitions, institutional maintenance, unresponsive authorities, and inflexible dogmas, but offer pathways of life-giving, spiritual experience, connection, meaning, vocation, and doing justice in the world. Fascinating book. Diana Butler Bass, just released. It's a good commentary on all the surveys that have come before us. Little wonder then that people are turning not to organized religion, but to other practices in their everyday lives in the search for the sacred, in the search for spiritual nourishment. Whether it's exercise classes, yoga, or whatever, whether it's small group prayer, visiting retreats, centers, or monasteries, to just have a little bit of the experience that monks and nuns would have in their daily routines, or going off and praying by oneself. What seems to be now a major trend that's happening to all organized, mainline organized religions here in the United States, and that's a specific detail there, is that people are not being nourished spiritually in their churches on Sunday. So here we are 50 years after the Constitution on Sacred Liturgy that changed things dramatically for us. What's going on in the world today? If you go to your bookstores, you find books, self-help books, by the way, on spirituality. No matter what your desire is, no matter what your field of interest is, no matter who you are, there's something for everybody out there, again, feeding that incredible quest. So what's next, one might ask? How will Christian tradition, and I'm quoting from Philip Sheldrake, who does a lot of research, he's an Englishman, on spirituality. How will Christian tradition survive while people turn to spirituality and away from institutional religions? Right now, he writes, spirituality seems to be a better course for people who are not being fed by their own religion. And while many are exploring, seeking alternatives, others, and this is very interesting as well, and we'd love to hear what you think about this, some are returning to the good old days, more conservative forms of worship within their own denominations, as if something was missed in these last 50 years. So the big question is, will mainline churches switch from this preoccupation with institutional structure, standing firm and strong and controlling all of it, to focus on a richer heritage, one might say, of spiritual wisdom? So, what are some of the questions for tomorrow? Andrew, you're going to... So we put together some questions. So Andrew talked about what we've learned from the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy. And I tried to pose some interesting facts and figures about what seems to be going on in the United States of America in terms of the changing trends. And so we came up with some questions. Now this is for tomorrow. Membership is a big question. If you take a close look at this particular map here, the darker shades of purple are those states where there is a drastic reduction in the number of active parish communities. I come from New York, and in my diocese, we've closed 33 churches in the past 4 or 5 years. Boston's done the same, Buffalo 50, et cetera, et cetera. You take a look at Wisconsin, you're the second darkest shade of purple, and so forth and so on. Where is there some growth or stabilization in the southern states? So a lot of this is dictated by age, demographics, and so forth and so on.
So the question is, how does the influx of immigrants mask the numbers of Catholics leaving their parishes? So in other words, if you might look at some literature that tells you that the Roman Catholic Church continues to grow. That growth is coming from the influx of immigrants, while the number of disaffected Catholics continues to grow. There's this figure that's thrown out all the time that the second largest denomination in the United States is disaffected Roman Catholics.
The other issue that we came up with, of course, is something that we're all familiar with now since last First Sunday of Advent, and that is language. And a lot of parishes are complying with the new text that we have in our Roman Missal. Others are struggling with it, and some others have completely ignored it, interestingly enough. So much depends upon, I suppose, where you live, what diocese you belong to, and what kind of attitude your bishop has regarding all of these things. So our question is,
in the search for a ritual sacral language, which is one of the motives that is in Liturgium's Authenticam, the document that impelled this, is the search for a ritual sacral language in this new missal, is it too much or not enough?
there's 6 questions I think we came up with. The next one is liturgy. I alluded to the fact that in some of the mainline religions, there is this effort to return to a previous format of celebrating what we would call the sacred mysteries, using formularies that are extraordinary. And so we see that this isn't a trend, but it's actually occurring in dioceses throughout this country. And the new latitude on the, or laxitude one might say, on the issue is that a local parish priest, if he perceives there is a need in his own parish, he no longer has to go to the bishop. And that may vary from diocese to diocese, but that's a new allowance, where in the past you had to go to the bishop. So if people came to me in the parish that I serve on Sundays and said, we want a Latin Mass, then I would make I would be asked to make a case to provide that for them. So our question is,
why are more people asking for this kind of liturgical experience?
you have a comment on that?
No. I want to hear, these questions are done specifically. What we really worked on this morning was how to try to put them out there with as little bias as possible, so that they're open-ended questions and that you might engage with us in the conversation.
So with as little bias as possible, leadership is the next question. There's certainly evidence, good evidence, that a lot of decisions in our church are made by a certain group of people, and a lot of people are wondering about that.
So what is your sense that your concerns are being heard by church leaders?
And one of the things we learned from the Constitution on the sacred liturgy, and also in other documents, in fact, it is the Constitution in our church now to strive for making decisions in a collegial kind of a manner. The way in which that's understood is that the bishops of the United States of America, when they gather, presumably each bishop is bringing to the table the input, the needs and expectations of the people in his local church. and that the American bishops then would act on that, and that the Bishop of Rome would do likewise before making decisions that affect the entire body, the entire Roman Catholic Church, over 1 billion of us, that the Bishop of Rome would listen to all the bishops of the world who presumably have listened to their people.
So how are you continuing to contribute to that conversation? Where are the places that you find you're able to contribute to that conversation?
The new Roman Missal has caused a lot of us to change the way in which we do things in terms of our liturgical practice in different parishes. And nevertheless, one of the amazing things that has happened over the last 50 years is the emergence of a lot of lay ecclesial ministries, that we are seen as co-workers. Ordained and non-ordained people in the body of Christ are seen as working together hand in hand, making decisions for the good of the larger church.
So what has been your experience as lay ecclesial ministers in the church, or how do you see that movement growing? So, I mean, we were commenting on the dinner this evening with the MTS students as how we see that as a real sign of hope, the success of people coming to the program to really, as St. Paul says, equip themselves to serve the people of God.
So it's about 7:41 on this clock. And we're supposed to go until, so what's on your mind?
Right, yeah. We'll have a sense of when to stop. There's dessert after, all right, so, yes.
So that concludes our, I guess, the part
Yeah,
two.
so
this
what's
is like
supposed to
right
happen
there.
with these things?
Okay.
If they work, we're going to try to
All right.
move around. People speak.
We have 2 microphones, and we're going to start with you, and Andrew and I will try not so much to answer unless it's a specific question, but let your voice be heard. If it's a comment, then so be it. If it is a direct question, we'll try to answer it.
These questions aren't in any order. I mean, I can just say.
Anything, yes. And you don't have to restrict yourself to what, we just thought, rather than just letting it, loose to give some focus. But yes, you can.
Okay, I just have a question about people wanting more Latin masses.
Mhm.
Where exactly are you getting the priests, number one, to say them? I mean, do they teach Latin any place anymore? I had it when I went to school, and some of my kids studied Latin, but I don't think you need it in medicine or in the priesthood anymore. Where are you going to get all these people?
I have one quick answer. Yeah. At the School of Theology in Mundelein, they actually have a program that not only teaches Latin to the seminarians who are preparing for ordination track, but they also have a program and therefore helping them understand how to preside at the extraordinary ritual, the extraordinary
form.
rite, the old form. But also they have a program that for laity to come in and to learn the Latin and to learn all about the old ritual.
So there's that much demand, or this is just one place in the country?
I don't know of too many other places. I know of that one. You can find it on YouTube, actually.
Yeah.
Glad to see the church is using media.
Yeah, and see, you said you studied Latin, but for in fact, for those of us old enough to have been altar boys, I mean, we learned to memorize, words that we really, Adeum quaelitificat juventutem meam. Now I know what it means, but I hope, but so that, I mean, how is that, what's the depth of that training? So, in other words, are we starting with learning Latin, or are we, you can teach a 5-year-old how to pronounce Latin because the pronunciation rules are invariable. So it would depend where.
Yeah, my thought on that, Andrew, is and that's an excellent point, because are we running the risk then of training actors to learn new lines and new roles without actually taking on that persona?
Terry.
I found your development of the changes in the St. Joseph Church. Interesting. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on the reintroducing of the tabernacle and the kneelers into the environment in the current situation in our diocese.
You're a Norbertine, and you know me too well to ask me that question. Anyway, yes, of course I have a few thoughts on it.
And as the designer of the place,
Yeah.
so do I.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand that it's done I don't know the details, but I know that it didn't spring spontaneously from the community, that it's done, within the kind of the guidelines of the bishop. I would say that the present guidelines still would permit, for example, if I were doing it, I would have put the Blessed Sacrament into the chapel where the icon is. So that's one. I think, if, I don't know what in other words, what do you do when you're told you have to do that? I was there for Mass yesterday, and I see, some of the real, in terms of what I was talking about, the issues that it raises. For example, what happens to the contemplative nature of the Eucharistic prayer when after the Holy Holy, the only thing I could think of, because I've studied there, was a group of Dutchmen in wooden shoes running around, so that it seems to me if you have to do that, then you have to learn new disciplines so that, that you don't enter back into the Eucharistic prayer until the place has completely quieted. But you know me well enough to know it's not something that I would have done, but I suppose if I were the pastor, I would have had to do it too. I think Dick has a more trenchant observation about the whole pulling together at the end.
First of all, when the committee gathered together, and they were meeting quite a few years before, they invited me to participate in the process. A lot of homework was done, a lot of catechesis was done. Let's just tick off a couple of reasons a couple of things that maybe we all ought to remember about why we reserve the Blessed Sacrament after Mass. The Church teaches us very, very clearly, and I could tick off some documents, but Holy Communion and worship of the Eucharist outside of Mass is one, a primary source that tells us that the primary reason for saving the sacrament after Mass is so we have it to take to the sick and the dying, those who cannot participate in that particular liturgy. The second reason would be for private adoration and distribution of the Eucharist at the liturgy if need be. The Code of Canon Law says that only one tabernacle is to be allowed in a church. And a good way of understanding that is we are required to have only one altar table. We're required to have only one baptismal font, only one cross of the altar. So the question about duplicating such a significant container in one church building causes some confusion, one might say. The American bishops, following the new general instruction of the Roman Missal, speak quite clearly about the location of the tabernacle. There are two locations now that are allowed. One is in a chapel that is distinct from the main part of the church. That's clear in Article 315, I believe, in the general instruction of the Roman Missal. The second location is, in fact, behind the altar table. The American bishops are clear to say, however, that if that's your preference to put the tabernacle behind the altar table, there should be some distance between the altar table where the sacrament is confected and the container where the Eucharist is reserved to take primarily to the sick and the dying. Why? So that no confusion between celebration of the Eucharist and reservation of the sacrament occurs. So I think Andrew pinpointed a concern, and that is, was this a collegial, getting back to our word about collegiality, was this a collegial move? Was this a move that simply was mandated? Those are some of the issues that I think post-conciliar Catholics have to ask. Good question. Another question, another topic. Oh, you can't be tired out already, or?
Well, I know my
Classes.
students, so if they don't ask a question, I'm going to start asking them a question. Brian?
Andrew, couple weeks ago, I had the chance to talk to a significant number of people who are so disenfranchised about making decisions. And they, at the end of the conference, they said, what can we do? What can we do about mandates that do not listen to our input? I didn't know what to answer. I don't have an answer.
Yeah,
Do you have a comment?
I'll let him go first.
I think the answer, in part, is found in the continuing emergence of lay ecclesial ministries. Unless a bishop in the United States is going to begin to draw from, say, North Africa in order to bring priests from there to this country, or from India to bring priests into this country, like we used to from Poland and Ireland, where there are a few priests there, then there's going to be even a crucial shortage of Roman Catholic clergy to preside at Eucharist. In our diocese, we have 24 parishes now that are run by lay ecclesial ministers. They're called parish life directors. The place where I worship on Sunday has a parish life director, a married woman, who loves liturgy, who presides in every way that she can. So I think that, in part, I like to start there, that the more that the laity take ownership of the roles that are rightfully theirs, permit me to use that kind of language here, by virtue of your baptism, those ministries will continue to grow and grow and grow. And somehow or another, I believe the Spirit is in there, and that's going to create a very different image. I'll close with just one example. I have noticed in the sacristy before liturgy and in other parts of the church after liturgy that the young people, especially the young women who are our servers, relate to this woman who, in all practical purposes, is the pastor. They relate to her in a way that they would never relate to me. And so I'm saying to myself that over time, if you go to church on Sunday and see more women involved in the things that they have a right to be involved in, slowly over time, things are going to change. That's in part, that's an answer.
The other would be, for me, was this at like a big, were you working with were you talking with one particular community, one local community, or was it like, a conference?
It was a conference.
Yeah. Because I find when, when you, all politics is local, that when you work, this would just be a good example, that I think that if you have the right people in the right positions, that you can, even within the present restrictions, do church well, But again, so I mean, I say, for example, when we hired a liturgical musician a couple of years ago, he asked for a vision mission statement for the liturgy at Dalesford Abbey. And one of the things that I take as a personal challenge is, how do I work with these rules and yet not allow it to have us cease praying deeply? And you can do that. It may not be, what I would like it to be, but that depends on, in other words, I think that locally we can still do church relatively well, realizing, that this whole point is said about, the liturgy as the expression and the shaping. It also expresses our sin. It also, so in other words, when we see what is not possible, and I think probably the best example for me would be the ministry of women in the church.
I think another thing is, how do we help those of us who are privileged to preside at common prayer to understand that it's not about us, and that it's not mine, and that I'm not administering this sacrament to you, but that, in the words of Augustine, everybody knows, it's our mystery. And that during that celebration, more people than just the priest have ministries to carry out. And that's where I think if we can share with priests this idea that really all you have to do, Father, is say the prayers and let everything else happen because of the gifts and the talents of the community that sustained you. Because when you stop and think about it, that's really what we're being asked to do, is lead the community in the prayer. We have a prayer book. And a little bit of a side here, I find myself, unfortunately, now reading the Mass until I can get this stuff in my head. Whereas in the old days, before the Missal, after how many years using the last Roman Missal, the last sacramentary, you kind of had it memorized, but now I gotta read this thing. So I'm trying hard to get away from that, reading the Mass, and yet I think a lot of our brothers just read the Mass for the congregation, and we need to see lay ecclesial ministries grow and grow and grow. But we also need priests then who are going to allow them to grow and grow and grow.
I have an observation related to what you just said, and it comes from the comments and the questions of young people today. They are pushing us to observe what you have just said, and that is, what are we actually doing at Ritual? We had a chance to listen to Adi Redzik from the university up here. He was talking about the millennials and the questions that they have about religion. And they said, as far as organized religion was concerned, they have 3 questions. What is the meaning of what you are doing?
Mm-hmm.
What is the significance of the symbols that you are using at liturgy? And how is what you're going to do, or what you are doing, going to change your life? And then a 4th question came from another group of young adults who said that they went to another church because at that church they acted out what they believe about God, themselves, and others. So these kinds of questions led me to take another look at religious ritual. What are we actually doing? And Catherine Bell and Tom Driver, Joseph Campbell and Karen Armstrong and Keith Pecklers have all opened up this ritual for us and have said that what we need to address is, what is the meaning of the ritual? If I could just give a small example. For example, at the consecration or the Eucharistic prayer, we talk about the transformation of bread and wine, but then if we apply that to us in receiving the body and blood of Christ, then we are transformed.
Mm-hmm.
So the meaning of what we are doing and the significance of what we are doing is that we are becoming the body of Christ.
Right.
And that involves us in a very great deal in what's going on. And there are 1,000 examples from our liturgy on how it can touch our lives.
I don't know if this is getting at the same thing, but it's why the last slide in my presentation is that I think ultimately, if you're doing some kind of evaluation of worship, you cannot stop at the church door, all right? I know I'm going to go into, right now, step into a very dangerous area, all right? But this whole thing that is going on now with religious liberty, all right? I mean, it is very clear that from the secular side, the language has changed from freedom of religion to freedom of worship. So there is a sense that in the dialogue with the government, that at least some of the government sees that the freedom is restricted to what happens within the church walls, not outside of it. All right. So I think that if worship is transforming, then it's transforming your whole vision. So it can't be a question of simply reverence within worship if I'm not then reverencing you, the community outside of that. So I mean, that we have to now have rules for civility. Well, so they're working in tandem. The one thing, and I'm not sure, I mean, I haven't read all those people, some of them, But the one difference that I would have, and maybe we're saying the same thing, I think that symbols have to be experienced before they're talked about. And if they're really done well, they may never have to be talked about. See, it's like when I was doing the gerbil, all right? That if you are in a ritual in which the presider is stopping to explain what he's doing, then he's probably not opening up the symbol in the first place. Because when the Roman rite is opened up, space, movement, posture, gesture, the verbs of dunking, breaking, etc., speak for themselves because they work from the deepest human levels. The two most basic actions of the sacraments are touching and the common sharing of food and drink. Louis Leakey says that's what's made human beings in the first place. We go back to what most basically makes us human.
I would add to your reading list, Diane, the work of Ron Grimes. He's perceived by many to be a real seminal thinker on this. He's at Yale right now. He's a Canadian researcher, a ritual researcher, and he does a lot of video recording of rituals and then examines them, plays them back, criticizes them, analyzes them, and so on. I've been sort of thinking about how do we take this effort to develop our own spiritualities, and how does the development of a spirituality in our own individual life come together with a larger community in church on Sunday when we are to experience common worship? How do you think that happens? I just think it's a good question. I don't have an answer. The studies in spirituality say in a Christian context that it has to be biblically rooted. That's where we start. It cannot be self-serving. So all the self-help spiritual books ultimately have to lead you toward a common kind of a concern. With the Bible as our foundation, the next step then is to contemplate the Word of God. That contemplation requires a certain amount of quietude in our lives so that God can speak to us. That represents a problem because we're so tethered to our PDAs and iPads and everything else, which are good things in my mind. That contemplation then has to, according to those who study the development of spiritualities, has to lead to some kind of action in the community. And so it's what you're talking about then. And so the question of liturgical spirituality makes some sense. If I come to church on Sunday and I'm practicing a particular spirituality, one would expect then that the liturgical experience is going to contribute to my transformation and prompt me to do, as Andrew said, go out there and make a difference in the quality of life in our communities. So I do have this hope that out of this search for the sacred, the transcendent, the elusive Holy One, that if it's going to happen on our own time, if our mainline religions aren't sustaining us, that maybe someplace down the pike, that collective spiritual growth is going to make, in this case, our church much better. In the back row up there, yes, please. In our diocese, this Joel Osteen came the other day while the microphone's being passed. You know, he's the one that has like 20,000 people every Sunday night on TV. You can catch it. 12,000 people came in Albany, New York. Now, if we were to have an event for Catholics only, I don't think we'd get 12,000 people. And these folks paid $15 to get in to listen to this guy for 2 hours. Kind of interesting. Question? Yes? Well, who's next? Oh, I'm sorry.
We have two. You go first, and then there, all right? Good.
I was wondering, with the new changes of the Roman Missal, since it has been a few months since then, since you guys are from different areas of the U.S., I was wondering how much it has changed population-wise for people to come to church. If, you know, it has dropped or something like that because of the changes and people haven't liked the changes or having to learn new things.
My parish experience is limited to Sunday. I'm very conscious that as I show up and dress up as a priest should, that there's a lot of other things going on during the week that I don't really know about, so I have to be very careful and sensitive to all those things. We did not take time to prepare the parish for the new translation. Instead, we had 8 weeks of catechetical homilies on the celebration of the liturgy of the Eucharist. And we started with gathering, as you pointed out. We started with gathering, then the next topic was listening. The next topic had to do with setting the table. The next topic had to do with Eucharist. And the next topic had to do with leaving. We did spend one Sunday talking about language in general. And the next Sunday was spent in talking about music in general. That led up to the first Sunday of Advent, and we went right into it. And we've got kind of a lot of cacophony in our congregation. Our church is intentional, like Andrew's community. We're a parish church in the diocese, but we draw from 51 zip codes. People come to us because we will accept everybody.
We don't have 51 zip codes, but it is an intentional community. We also, we preached every Sunday from the Sunday after Labor Day until November 27th. But we did take the text, tried to relate them to the readings of the day, and really break them open from their scriptural base and somewhat catechetically, so it wouldn't necessarily fit my idea of exactly what a homily should be. We also did different, like different programs, or, like you could come on a Saturday morning, et cetera. And I think that we're pretty well prepared. And I have a sense that people know it. People know it. Now, how it's working, I have no idea. I have no sense that we've lost anyone because of it. And I think down the road that would be an interesting study if you could get in touch with it. My sense would be, and this is just an amateur, that if it happened alone, it would be one thing. But I think to some sense, in some sense, its coming was the, what image you want to use, the straw that broke the camel's back, or I think that for some people, it was given, what is going on with sexual abuse, closing of parishes, et cetera. I went and did a presentation in my old home parish in South Philadelphia, which is marked by massive white flight, and so it's a parish probably that is going to be closed and has a collection of older Italian women and men. And so I did this presentation, and this old Italian woman said, "Didn't they have anything better to do?" And so I think, that coming on the rest, I would be very surprised if there was no one who stopped coming. I don't have a sense from my own experience of a massive withdrawal. What I do have an experience of is I have yet to be at a celebration of the Eucharist, including my own presiding, where there is not at some point, you have a sense of he's lost or he's in the wrong place. Because for one thing, there are 7 different editions of the Missal. Now, they all follow the same format. But, for example, when I used to do memos, I could say, we're going to use the prayers on page 475. I can't do that anymore. I mean, though we're using one version, there are 7 different translations. So,
I noticed, I wanted to follow up, I forgot, but Andrew's helping me remember that after our catechetical homilies, we did have feedback sessions, listening sessions in our congregation. We call it classes between the masses. We have 2 liturgies on Sunday. There's an hour and a half in there, so that's where we have adult faith formation. And the response was very much like the woman said to you. There's so many things going on in everybody's lives. This, I feel, was not a big deal for a lot of folks. So we changed the words a little bit. We can learn a few words. What's really bugging people are a lot of these other issues. the role of women in the church, the birth control thing, the stance of the bishop about it. I mean, let's just focus on the things that are really bugging Catholic people. This language thing, tip of the iceberg. There are a lot of other things going on beneath that are far more important.
Over here, you were next.
I just have a quick question about one of the first of the 6 questions that you outlined, and maybe it's more of a comment or kind of a
Fine.
slight criticism.
Great.
But the way the question was framed was that the influx of immigrants masks the number of Catholics or the decline of Catholics.
Right.
And I was sort of wondering about the very way that question is structured. Does that somehow imply that real Catholicism is kind of white Catholicism? And I'm thinking here specifically with Brian Massengill's book, Racial Justice in the Church, that as a faculty and staff community, we recently read. And it just prompted me to get going in my mind.
Yeah.
When we consider the direction that the church is growing in the United States, even the language we use, we should be attentive to,
Absolutely.
right? Because it
Right.
raises these questions: what is the church? What is
Right.
real Catholicism? So, anyway, that's just kind of a comment
Well,
back.
Yeah, I mean, in that question, I guess you could say we were, dividing to the church into Catholics who have been here baptized, so definitely not just white Catholics, as opposed to the numbers coming from immigration and not just Latino. All right, so that was the way it's phrased.
Yeah, I think, yes, thank you very much. That's a most sensitive comment. Just permit this follow-up. I think by phrasing that question, we were not even thinking about the issue you're raising, other than the statistics are not that transparent that points out that, yes, our numbers are up, largely because of the influx from people from different countries rather than Europe. Yeah.
Right, and then I think that allows us to think about the church as a more global community than
Yeah.
maybe we have in the past. So,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Somebody, there was, yes.
Real quickly, I just want to thank you for pointing out Joel Olstein and recognizing how the pews are being emptied and recognizing why is it that he's attracting so many people. And I was curious. I'm a cradle Catholic, and I believe in the Catholic Church and what its teachings. But I'm also curious how he's getting so many people to hear him. So I've been about 5 years ago, I read his book, and it's offering so much hope. And he keeps it simple. Sometimes I think we, as Catholics, make things difficult. There's so many things to learn and to know. So I think Joel, he's onto something where he's offering hope all the time, and he keeps it simple. So I think we should look at that, and as you
Oh, you're
did on
absolutely
yourself.
right, yeah. Part of my work, I'm doing considerable work with Jewish congregations, and I was part of a thing called Synagogue 2000. And we met in Ojai, California, and one of the first things we did was this whole group of rabbis, about 40 of them, and this Christian priest, we went down to, it's not Camelback, Saddleback, south of L.A., and whose church is that? Rick Warren's
Warren.
church, yeah.
Yeah.
So we go there, and so like you gotta understand this. The place is packed. There are about 7,000 people, and 40 rabbis walk in with their yarmulkes. And I don't think Warren was there preaching, but whoever was on the stage gave a large hallelujah that we got all these Jews in here today that are going to convert. I mean, he didn't use that kind of language, but Wade Roof did a lot of seminal work on the Seekers a while ago. It's old stuff now. Trying to find out what is it about these preachers that is making up for whatever appears to be missing in the preaching, the music, and the ritual language, one might say, of the mainline churches. And I just think it's worthy of further research and further conversation until we can figure it out. I looked at a study of evangelical Protestants that came out of their international meeting last August somewhere in Australia, I'm sorry. And they find themselves to be in trouble. And they're in trouble because they feel they're losing the battle against secularism. They don't see the Catholic Church or any other organized religion as the enemy. but they feel that it's very much the same language that, the Bishop of Rome is using, that we have to watch out for this, the countercultural stuff that's going on. So it's an interesting time to be alive, I think, or to be a student of religion, because we're in such a state of transition.
Is that Bridget? Do you have a question? Hi.
I'd like to thank you for reminding me that I am now approaching middle age, since I remember the earlier version of Old St. Joe's. I wasn't prepared to think of myself as middle aged, but I appreciate that. I do remember as a student gathering in the previous iteration of Old St. Joe's on the altar at 9 p.m. Mass, and the students would gather, and we would sit together and hold hands. And it was a very special experience, and it was often led by a woman. 20 some years later, I now, as a continuing member of this community and of this parish, worry about what you just touched upon as far as the role of women in the Catholic Church, and the sense that if we just keep volunteering or we just keep staying involved in what we, quote, have a right to be involved in,
Right.
that it will all be okay. And our church will start to hear what 52% of the population is struggling with. We'll start to understand the issues that our female students are dealing with, our female faculty, our female administrators, those of us who believe in the Catholic Church and want to support all that's there and can be for the next generations, but are deeply struggling with that inclusivity or lack thereof.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, because when I was answering Brian's question, I was talking about, basically how we're getting through tomorrow. I am past middle age, and and I hesitate to say this, but I will, because your comment really has to be answered. When I was saying that to Brian, and when I said that I think that the liturgy expresses our sin as well as our grace, I am at the point in my life where I say adults need to live with the consequences of their decisions. And if from the leadership we do not empower the baptismal graces of women, then we have to live with the consequences of that. And that's a very sad thing, but I don't see any other way. The other image I use for myself is the addictions model, that maybe it has to get worse before it gets better. Maybe it has to, and I mean that in a lot of areas besides women. But I think you are absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Is there a parish community in the area that empowers women during a celebration of liturgy? And by that I mean allows women to assume roles that just might stretch the definition of that role a little bit. Is there any parish that really is willing to do that?
Laurie?
I would say what inspired me to do what I'm doing today, going to school for what I want, I was inspired by a parish director in a different diocese in northern Wisconsin, where this woman was allowed to have a significant role in the liturgy, including reflection, We're not allowed as females to do homilies, although I correct that because I was corrected. It is not because we are not female. It is because only ordained can preach homilies.
Well, there's the solution.
Those are subtle.
So I would say yes, there are parishes out there, and I have had a really positive experience, and that's what inspired me to do what I'm doing today.
When's the last time there was a synod in the Green Bay Diocese? Well, what I'm hearing as I travel around is that a synod, and I can't really give you the definition of a synod according to canon law, but every so often a diocese one would hope, we'll have a synod. And the synod is an opportunity for the entire church to come together and to do what we're doing here tonight. And what comes out of that is a real written declaration, one might say, of the needs and expectations of that particular diocese. And they're presented to the bishop, who is part of that entire synod proceedings. And it seems to me that maybe if there were more synods, and that would allow voices to be heard, that someplace along the line it's putting the leadership of our church, it's calling them to be accountable in terms of responding to the needs and expectations of their church. Back to your question, how do you go about doing that, in the face of frustration that nobody's listening and things are being mandated without any consultation and so forth and so on? Someplace along the line, someone has to start requesting synods, sessions, listening sessions.
All right, all right. All right, we'll do two. One, and then Betsy. Yeah.
Who's next?
Yeah.
Thank you. That's why I asked. Yeah, I agree with the comment that I like the idea of a synod. I wonder what Bishop Ricken would respond to that suggestion. But I'm going to make it to him, so I'll let you know what happens. It's the changes in the language. The changes in the language are not that big a deal, as you say. Some of the spatial changes that have been mandated are much more significant, and of course become, they proscribe rather than facilitate worship. But in both instances, the language and the spatial changes, what is so frustrating is that there was no response to complaints, to appeals, exceptions. In some cases, apparently, there were some parishes where that worked, but it certainly didn't work here. I think pastors were intimidated, in fact. So I'm reflecting on various things here. But I want to speak for my grandkids. When I can persuade them to, well, they'll come because they still obey, for some reason, they still obey me when I say you have to come with me to church. But then I'm disturbed because they're bored completely. And they're very bright. They're very bright. And they're much too bright to be bored. But then I start seeing the Mass through them. And the prayers, to which they don't relate. They just don't connect. They just don't connect. So the people in the evangelical churches where the space is a living room and everybody can participate in a feeling and both intellectual and emotional way, sure, that's going to be much more. How can we expect people at the age of 16 to get confirmed and then to continue on when at the age of 12 they're totally bored by the language? And this is before the changes occurred. So looking through my grandchildren's eyes, I'm asking what can be done to engage 10 and 12-year-old children? Now they do relate Wednesday night when they go to the I forget the name of we used to call it religious ed, but what is it? generations of faith, or, you know, whatever the parish calls it, that's much more meaningful to them than coming to church on Sunday. But now I've been talking way too long, and I'm going to stop.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Was there one last one, yes?
Betsy.
Actually, it's a little bit of a comment and a question. I'm a former evangelical, was a member of Saddleback Church for quite some time. My mom is still a member of Saddleback Church. Just a couple of comments on what is attractive. It's not just one congregation, it's split up into many. So you have massive lay participation. The gifts of thousands of people all the time being used, including women. So women feel extremely attracted to that kind of tradition where they can lead, they can preach, you know, etc. But one other thing there too, and I'm a Bible instructor and you'll be able to tell by this, and that is that when you go to an evangelical church, you are not just having a worship experience, you have an exegetical experience. What Bob just said, your intellect is challenged by not just a worship service, but an educational homily that's grounded usually in some sort of interpretation of a biblical passage that relates to you, not just what somebody is telling you what the biblical passage says, but leading you through it. And so even if you get bored with, which some people do, it's still, you're educated in that biblical tradition. And you commented earlier something about we're grounded in the Word of God. How many Catholics know what's in there?
Yeah, good, very good question. Wow.
How many priests, as Dr. Boland just said, know what's in there? That I don't know how to resolve.
Yeah.
I think at least in seminary education in the last decade or two, I think that priests are rather well educated in the exegetical. I think the jump is to the homiletical, which is in fact quite different than the exegetical. All right, are we done?
And then,
I think we are finished for this formal part of the presentation.
Oh, right.
The conversation will continue. There's a reception afterwards. Limited number of desserts, so go first. No, there's not. Please join me in thanking Dick and